In the heart of Chicago, amidst the shadows of the 1930s, there was a place the entire city seemed to pretend not to see. A plot of land where whispers echoed louder than any scream. The deformed ruins of a cursed building, known to many as the Murder Castle, seemed to defy time itself. Despite the fire that supposedly destroyed its guts at the end of the 19th century, part of the structure remained, as if something or someone simply refused to let it disappear. Those who approached reported hearing sounds that did not belong to the present. Rushed footsteps fading into emptiness, dull thuds from the underground, and sometimes something even more disturbing, voices that seemed to float through the air, calling, waiting. But what really happened there after the name H. Holmes was erased from the newspapers, but never from the city's memory? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I want to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver these videos to more people and allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. When the fire hit the infamous Murder Castle in 1895, many believed that the place had finally been condemned to oblivion. Headlines announced the end, and authorities assured that the nightmare had been reduced to ashes. But like every good lie the city tells itself, this one didn't last long. Because the truth is, the building was never completely destroyed. A good portion of the facade collapsed, that's a fact. But the internal structures, they held strong. Hidden corridors, secret passages, and especially the underground floors remained practically intact. And here begins a part of the story that almost no one tells. What did they do with that skeleton of bricks and concrete after the dust settled? Did the city really bury that past, or merely cover it up? Officially, the lot became a warehouse. Simple, discreet, functional. But those who walked through the Englewood neighborhood in the 1920s noticed that something was off. Trucks always arrived at night, unloading heavy boxes, metal structures, and carefully covered objects. And curiously, there was never any activity during the day. Who worked there? And what exactly was being brought to that place that was supposedly just storing tools? It didn't take long for rumors to spread. And the rumors, in this case, were more than just neighborhood gossip. Workers from nearby shops began reporting inexplicable sounds coming from the basement. The kind of sound that doesn't match a warehouse. Dull thuds, metallic creaks, and even what seemed to be the echo of heavy doors being dragged. And the closer they got to the side door, the one that was never opened during the day, the clearer those sounds became. That's when the story started to spiral out of control. A small local newspaper published, in 1928, an article that today practically no longer exists. The headline was simple but disturbing. The Englewood Ghost Hospital? The article talked about strange activities on the old Murder Castle grounds, citing anonymous sources who claimed the site had been renovated, not for storage, but for clandestine medical procedures. However, less than a day later, the article disappeared, and the reporter's name was never found in the newspaper's archives again. Coincidence? When investigating public records from that period, something even stranger appears. Several requests for electrical and plumbing maintenance were filed for that address between 1925 and 1930. So far, so good. But when trying to trace the companies responsible, none of them existed. They were fake names, ghost addresses, phones that were never activated. How is it possible that a supposedly abandoned building generated so much documentation without anyone noticing? And that's not all. Residents began noticing frequent visits from men who always arrived after nightfall. All well-dressed, hats covering their faces, and none of them seemed to be from the neighborhood. They entered through the same side door, the one that never opened in daylight, and left hours later, often carrying wooden boxes, far too large to simply contain tools. Who were these men? And what were they transporting from there? From that point on, the reports became even more unsettling. Vulnerable people in the area, homeless individuals, newly arrived immigrants, temporary workers, began to disappear. Always the same profiles, no family in the city, no one to miss them, no one to look for them. And strangely, many of them were last seen around the old castle. Can you really call that a coincidence? Those who dared to approach the building during the early hours described disturbing experiences. Sounds of footsteps, as if someone were hurriedly walking through the corridors, muffled screams, short, suddenly cut off, and even voices. Voices that seemed to emerge from the ground itself, distorted, as if passing through concrete, wood, metal, and decades of forced silence. What the hell was happening inside that place? And that's when the darkest theories began to gain traction. Some believed the place had become a hub for illegal trafficking. Others thought it was a hideout for criminals. But there was one theory that simply kept everyone awake at night. What if that space had been transformed into a clandestine hospital? Not a regular hospital, but a laboratory where practices that could never be legalized were carried out, far from any inspection. The fact is, the building remains standing, hidden behind superficial renovations and a silence that seemed bought. The walls that once witnessed unimaginable horrors were never truly demolished. And if there was still any doubt, it would soon begin to fade when the whispers coming from those corridors became impossible to ignore. During the day, that old building seemed like just another structure forgotten by time. But at night, it transformed into something completely different. And it didn't take long for those working in the area to realize that something was very wrong there. The reports, over the years, always followed the same unsettling pattern. First, sounds that no one could explain. Then, the undeniable feeling that, even empty, the place was never truly alone. Night security guards, janitors, laborers, regular people used to working the night shift, swore they heard footsteps coming from inside the building, hurried steps followed by sudden stops, as if someone were hiding, watching, waiting. The detail that left them the most disturbed? The sound came from areas where, theoretically, there were no floors anymore, where the building should have collapsed years ago. And the sounds didn't stop there. Dull knocks, 3 taps, always 3, repeated at almost perfect intervals. And then silence. A silence that, according to many, was even more disturbing than the sounds themselves. Because it didn't feel like a natural silence. It was as if the very air held its breath, waiting for something to happen. And anyone who dared approach the doors or windows would swear. The voices would begin. Voices that weren't ordinary whispers. They were fragments of conversations, as if someone were murmuring very close, but without forming complete sentences. And they always came from the same place, the basement. That basement which, officially, no longer existed since the fire of 1895, but everyone in the neighborhood knew, had never truly been sealed. Some tried to be rational. It must be old pipes, walls expanding, typical old building noises. But that kind of explanation didn't hold for long, especially when reports of lights began to surface. Small beams like flashlights moving inside the building, even when no one, absolutely no one, was supposed to be in there. Who was carrying those lights? And more importantly, who turned them on and who turned them off? Once, a night guard from a nearby factory, a man well known in the community, described as skeptical and tough, decided to go in and put an end to the stories once and for all. He lasted less than 10 minutes inside the perimeter, and when he came out, he never worked another night shift again. He refused to even walk down the same street. What did he see in there? He never told, not even to his own family. And he wasn't the only one. Janitors hired for occasional cleaning jobs also dropped their mops and brooms mid-task, all reporting the same thing, a presence. It wasn't something they saw or heard. It was the overwhelming feeling that something was there. Something that watched them the entire time, even when they seemed to be completely alone. The reports became so common that, by 1930, some neighboring businesses started adding clauses to their night shift contracts. Employees had the right to refuse any shifts after sunset if it involved being near the old murder castle. Can you imagine what has to happen for a company to actually write that into a contract? As if all of this wasn't unsettling enough, a very specific detail began circulating among the local workers. Many claimed that, on the quietest nights, it was possible to hear a sound that didn't seem human. Something metallic, like chains being dragged, mixed with a low, continuous noise that sounded like breathing. A heavy, deep breathing that seemed to reverberate through the walls, coming from somewhere, far, far below the ground. But perhaps the strangest report of all came from a delivery driver who, on a cold November night, swore he saw a figure standing in a second-floor window. A motionless silhouette, staring directly at the street. When he blinked, the figure vanished. And the most bizarre detail? The second floor on that side of the building had not existed since 1895. As the months passed, it became impossible to ignore what was happening there. It was no longer just about sounds, shadows, or voices. It was about the uncomfortable certainty that the building was not empty. It never had been, And perhaps whatever inhabited that place was something that not even time itself could erase. As reports of sounds, voices, and apparitions began to spread, a new theory emerged, and it was far darker than any ghost or haunting. There were those who swore that the old murder castle wasn't just an abandoned building, but rather the facade of something much worse. A clandestine hospital, a place where medicine met the forbidden, the illegal, and perhaps even the supernatural. The first rumors started almost timidly. Whispered comments in bars, hushed conversations among employees of nearby businesses. People spoke of men dressed like doctors entering and leaving the building during the dead of night. Always silent, always discreet. They were never seen during the day. Never. And the questions quickly began to arise. Who were these people? And more importantly, who or what were they treating inside? Soon, the rumors began to take on frightening shapes. Disappearances of homeless people, newly arrived immigrants, people without documents, without family, without anyone to look for them. And the pattern was always the same. They vanished near the old castle. Were these kidnappings? Did they run away? Or were they taken inside that building, from which no one ever returned? Records from that time, rarely publicized, show that between 1929 and 1930, the Chicago police received more than 24 reports of strange noises, suspicious activities, and people disappearing in that area. Curiously, almost all of these reports were filed away without investigation. Why? Who was ensuring that silence? Who had enough power to shut down the police in a city like Chicago? And the theories began to multiply. Some claimed it was an illegal abortion clinic, something unfortunately common at the time, where desperate women sought unlawful alternatives. But other reports went far beyond that. There were those who insisted that the building hid something infinitely darker, an organ trafficking hub. Sounds absurd? Maybe. But it's worth remembering that in the 1930s, the black market for organs was a reality that many pretended didn't exist. There were no regulated organ banks. And for every person willing to pay for a kidney, there was someone willing to supply it, regardless of the means. And we're better to hide that than within the guts of a building with such a macabre past, where no one dared even approach. And it doesn't stop there. Reports emerged, never officially confirmed, it's true, but far too numerous to ignore, that the site was also used for unauthorized medical experiments. Practices that defied any ethical code, even by the standards of the time. Tests with experimental drugs, surgical procedures without anesthesia, and even interventions that blurred the line between medicine and the occult. Believe it or not, documents found years later in forgotten city archives suggest that doctors from other states visited the location. Doctors whose names appear in no formal record. Who are these people? And what were they looking for there? And there's another deeply unsettling fact that can't be ignored. Residents frequently reported the presence of refrigerated trucks parked behind the building, especially during the early hours of the morning. Always with the cargo hold locked, engine running, and leaving before sunrise. What exactly was being transported? Those who passed by swore they could smell something peculiar in the air. It wasn't the usual scent of mold or rotting wood. It was something more metallic, sweet, heavy. The kind of smell that, once experienced, you never forget. And curiously, it always seemed stronger near the basement vents. Coincidence, or a sign that something far more organic was happening down there? And while the city went on with its life, ignoring that cursed building, the question that spread through the alleys, whispered lips, and eyes that avoided looking toward that structure was always the same. Those who went in, did they come out? And if they did they come out whole? The more that building was investigated, the more a sinister question began to take hold in the conversations of those who knew, those who saw, or those who simply refused to get close. What if Holmes never truly left? Not physically, of course. But what if what he built and everything he represented had somehow found a way to survive? Holmes's name, although practically banned from newspapers at the time, never disappeared from the streets of Chicago. It was whispered in bars, in back alleys, in quick conversations between factory workers. And always with the same weight, the same discomfort. It was as if, even in death, he was still there. As if his presence was embedded not only in the walls, but in the very ground of the city. The signs pointing to this weren't few. During the 1930s, police began noticing an extremely disturbing pattern. Bodies disappeared. Investigations were opened and mysteriously filed away without any explanation. Documents vanished, witnesses backed out, and whenever someone truly tried to dig deeper, they either disappeared themselves or simply gave up the investigation. What was so powerful that it could silence even the most stubborn? And once again, the center of these suspicions seemed to be the same: the old Englewood building. Internal reports, only revealed decades later, show that agents of the time actually entered the building on several occasions. And what they found inside was never officially recorded. Only scattered notes describing structures incompatible with civil architecture, spaces unsuitable for any legal use, and in one of them, a description that still sends chills today: a dense metallic odor, impossible to ignore, and sounds coming from below. But was it just coincidence? Perhaps. But then, how do you explain the reports from the investigators themselves who swore they heard knocking from the basement while walking through the upper floors? 3 knocks. Always 3. The same ones that had already been reported countless times by residents and workers in the area. Who, or what, was knocking from down there? Some began to suggest that it wasn't just a building with a dark history anymore. It was something more. A magnet for tragedy. A place that seemed to attract pain, suffering, and that somehow fed on it. It wasn't just about the past. It was as if the evil H. Holmes cultivated there had grown deep roots that crossed decades, and somehow never stopped growing. This theory begins to make even more sense when reports of bizarre deaths in the area start appearing. People found without explanation, no visible marks, but with expressions of pure terror frozen on their faces. Bodies with no signs of struggle, no injuries, but one thing in common: they were all found just a few meters from the old murder castle. Can you really call that a coincidence? And it doesn't stop there. Forgotten records show that, on at least 3 occasions, private investigators tried to map the building's basement. Every project was aborted. The reason? Equipment that simply stopped working as soon as it passed the first staircase. Broken gear? Electrical failures? Maybe. But none of that equipment malfunctioned anywhere else. The most terrifying part is that some of the old blueprints of the murder castle, the few that survived, indicate that the basement had more than one level. Yes, more than one. Interconnected tunnels, hidden chambers, and compartments that, officially, were never located. Was there something, or someone, that still inhabited those spaces well into the 1930s? Something that was never meant to be found. And the more you look at this pattern, the harder it is to believe that it's all just coincidence. Because if evil can in fact be built, then maybe it can also be eternal. And if you think all of this was left in the past, you're very wrong. Because even decades after the crimes, the rumors, the disappearances, that place still had a very clear role in the city. And it wasn't just a forgotten spot on the map. It was a place everyone avoided. You know that kind of street where, when you realize where you are, you pick up your pace, cross to the other side, or simply turn back. That's exactly what it was like. Even in the 1930s, with Chicago growing and modernizing, that block seemed to exist in a different reality. People did walk by, but they never looked directly at the building. And if they did, it wasn't for long. Anyone who tried to ignore the discomfort quickly realized it wasn't possible, because it wasn't just visual. Anyone who walked by could feel it. The air felt different, heavier, colder. It was as if the environment itself rejected your presence. And there were plenty of reports of people who suddenly started feeling sick. Nausea, dizziness, a strange tightness in the chest, which disappeared as soon as they took a few steps away from there. Coincidence? And there's more. At night, that building seemed to come alive. Seriously. Lights appearing out of nowhere, shadows moving behind the windows, and mind you, windows that officially hadn't existed since the fire. Can you imagine? You look at a wall where there's nothing, and suddenly, you see a silhouette passing by. Who, or what, was still walking inside? And the sounds, don't even get started. Anyone who dared to pass by after sunset swore they heard scratching, muffled thuds, and sometimes that one sound that showed up in nearly every account. Something heavy being dragged. Always coming from the same place, the basement. That basement that, officially, shouldn't even exist anymore. And little by little, even those who claimed not to believe began to change their behavior. Shop owners in the surrounding area simply stopped parking on the same side of the street. No car stayed there after 7 p.m. None. And it didn't take long for everyone to know why. Anyone stubborn enough to park nearby would start having problems. Flat tires without explanation, engines that wouldn't start, doors that jammed. Always there. Only there. And of course, there's always that type of person who wants to prove they're braver than everyone else. And that's exactly what some urban explorers of the time tried to do. With flashlights, cameras, and a hefty dose of boldness, they went into the building and came running out minutes later. The few photos that were made public showed walls covered in marks, strange symbols that no one could explain. After that, they never tried again. The most unsettling thing is that no one talked openly about it. There were no news reports, no journalists covering it. But everyone knew. It was the kind of knowledge passed from mouth to mouth, from glance to glance, from silence to silence. Because, even without being in the headlines, that place remained an uncomfortable reminder that some things simply don't disappear. The truth? Chicago may have tried to forget. They may have torn down walls, erased names, pretended it never existed. But anyone who lives there knows it never went away. Because the building, the land, whatever inhabits that space is still there, waiting, watching, and maybe even calling. And in the end, the question that just won't leave your mind is this: if evil can be built, then can it also be eternal? What happened inside that building is more than just an old story. It's an open scar in the memory of an entire city. Because no matter how much they try to turn it into an urban legend, anyone who lived it, or simply dared to get close, knows full well that it was never just a building. It was never just concrete, wood, and bricks. It was, and maybe still is, something much darker. And so the question lingers to this day, hanging over the corners of Englewood, through the empty hallways of that lot, and maybe, in the mind of anyone hearing this story. What if that evil never intended to leave? This story is just one piece, and someday, maybe you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, make sure to subscribe, like the video. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.